It's Sunday evening, a little after 8 o'clock. I am sitting on the screened-in lanai of my small condominium here in San Diego, a place that has been my quiet sanctuary since my husband, Tom, passed away. The air is warm and smells of salt from the distant ocean and the night-blooming jasmine my neighbor so lovingly cultivates. A profound peace should settle over a person at this hour, at my age. But I am not at peace. My hands are trembling slightly as I type these words. My family, the small, precious family that is the entire center of my world, is in turmoil. My daughter is heartbroken. And I am the one who has caused it all. I am 78 years old, and I have just detonated a truth bomb that is left a 50-year crater in the middle of our lives. I need you, the strangers of the internet, to tell me if after all these years I was the one in the wrong. To understand, you have to understand the lie. The great, kind, and soul-crushing lie I have been telling my daughter for more than a decade. The lie, like most of the significant lies in this world, was born from a place of love. It was a shield I had constructed to protect my daughter, Sarah, from a truth I believed she could not bear to face. The lie was a simple and an entirely plausible one. It was the lie of old age, of distance, of the gentle, inevitable fading of the very old. And it was the lie I told her again last week, on the phone, the call that would ultimately lead to the end of everything. She had called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I could hear the forced, brittle cheerfulness in her voice, a sound a mother knows as the overture to a heartbreak. She was talking about my great-grandson, her son Leo's 10th birthday party. It had been the weekend before. It was a wonderful party, Mom, she'd said. He had a dozen of his little friends over. We had a bouncy castle. David, my husband, almost broke his ankle trying to show off. She had laughed, a small, sad sound with no real joy in it. That sounds lovely. Sweetie, I'd said, my own heart beginning to ache with a familiar, weary dread. I knew what was coming. It was, she'd said, and then her voice had dropped, the false cheerfulness evaporating. They sent a card again this year, Mom. Grandma Doris and Grandpa Frank. A Hallmark card, the kind you buy in a multi-pack. With a $50 bill tucked inside. They didn't even sign it. It was just printed. She took a shaky breath. They didn't call him Mom. Not on his 10th birthday. Not even a text message. And then came the question, the same question she had been asking me in different forms for the past 10 years. The question that was a small, sharp knife in my own heart every time I heard it. What did I do wrong, Mom? She'd whispered, her voice cracking. Why don't they love me? Why don't they want to see my children? And I, her mother. The woman who was supposed to be her rock, her truth teller. I had taken a deep breath. And I had pulled the heavy, familiar, and deeply suffocating blanket of the lie over us both once more. Oh. Honey, don't be silly, I'd said, my voice. A symphony of gentle, practiced, and utterly false reassurance. Of course they love you. You know they do. They're just old Sarah. Your grandfather is 97. He can barely see to sign his own name anymore. And the drive from their home in Orange County all the way to you in Los Angeles, it's just too much for them. It's not about you. It's just old age. That's all. It was a good lie. It was a kind lie. And it was a lie that had been my constant, tormenting companion for 11 years. The truth, the real, ugly, and unvarnished truth, was that my in-laws, Frank and Doris, were in excellent health for their age. My father-in-law still played 9 holes of golf twice a week. And the real reason they had not seen their great-grandchildren in 10 years was a poison so profound, so deeply ingrained, that I had spent a decade of my life trying and failing to protect my daughter from it. The lie was born on a perfect sunny afternoon in May 11 years ago. My own beloved husband Tom was still alive then. Sarah, our only child, had just announced her engagement. She had brought her fiancé David to meet us and her grandparents. For the first time, Sarah had always had a good, if slightly distant, relationship with her paternal grandparents. Frank and Doris were products of a different era, a colder, more formal generation. They were pillars of their conservative community, their lives a testament to order, tradition, and a deep, unshakable belief in their own rigid worldview. They had loved their son, my Tom, and by extension, they had been fond of Sarah. They had been proud of her accomplishments in a distant, formal kind of way. But David was different. David was a wonderful man. A kind, intelligent, and deeply decent architect who adored our daughter. He was perfect in every way but one, at least in the eyes of Frank and Doris. David was black. The first meeting, which we had hosted in our own home in San Diego, had been a masterclass in tense, brittle politeness. Frank and Doris had been perfectly, icily civil to David. They had asked him pointed, condescending questions about his background, his education, his family. David, who was a saint of patience, had answered every one of them with a calm, easy grace. Sarah, who was so in love and so desperate for her family to love him too, had been completely blind to the icy, hostile undercurrent in the room. But I had seen it. And Tom had seen it. The next day, my in-laws had summoned us to their home in Orange County for a private conversation. No Sarah, no David, just us. We sat in their pristine, silent, and museum-like living room, a room where no one ever seemed to actually live. My father-in-law, Frank, a man who had rarely ever raised his voice, had been the one to speak. His voice was a low, cold, and utterly implacable thing. Helen. Tom, he had begun, his hands clasped on his knees. Your daughter is a lovely girl, but we cannot give our blessing to this. This union? What are you talking about? Dad? Tom had asked, a look of baffled disbelief on his face. David is a wonderful man. He makes her happy. He is not one of us, my mother-in-law, Doris, had said, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that was somehow more venomous than a shout. It is not right. It is not natural. And then Frank had laid out their terms, the brutal, racist, and deeply unforgiving verdict that would shape the next decade of our lives. If Sarah chooses to marry this man, he'd said, his eyes as cold and as hard as stone, that is. Her choice, but we will not be a part of it. We will not attend the wedding. We will not have him in our home. And we will not, under any circumstances, acknowledge any children that come from that union. We will not have mixed-race children carrying the Gable family name. It is a disgrace to the memory of our ancestors. It is a disgrace to God, we had argued. My husband, bless his good and decent heart, had fought for his daughter, for the woman he loved. He had yelled. He had pleaded. He had tried to reason, but it was like arguing with a brick wall. Their prejudice was a thing of ancient, unshakable granite. Their fear of what the neighbors, what their friends at the country club, what their pastor at their all-white church would think. It was a force more powerful than their love for their own granddaughter. We had left their house that day, a profound and terrible silence in the car between us. We had been given a choice, our daughter's happiness or the love of my husband's parents. It was not a choice at all, and in that car on that long, sad drive back to San Diego, the lie was born. "We can't tell her," I had whispered, the words a poison in my own mouth. "We can't tell her that her own grandparents are rejecting her because of the color of her husband's skin. It will break her heart. It will taint her happiness." And Tom, my kind, gentle, and peace-loving Tom, had agreed. We would spare her. We would tell her that they were just old-fashioned, that they were having a hard time with the idea of the marriage, that they just needed time. It was our first and our greatest failure as parents. We had chosen to protect our daughter from the truth, and in doing so, we had become the silent, complicit guardians of a deeply ugly secret. The years that followed were a long, slow, and agonizing dance of deception. Frank and Doris had held to their terrible vow. They had not come to the wedding. They had sent a polite, formal, and deeply insulting card of regret. When Leo, my first great-grandchild, had been born, they had sent no gift, no congratulations. And so the lie had grown. "They're just set in their ways, honey. It's hard for them to travel now. And they love you, of course they do. They just have a funny way of showing it." Each lie was a small tear in the fabric of my own soul. I watched my beautiful, kind, and loving daughter, a woman with a heart as big as the world, internalize their rejection. I watched her convince herself that it was her fault, that she had somehow done something to offend them, to push them away. And I just kept repeating the same tired and increasingly threadbare excuses. After Tom had passed away, the burden of the lie had become entirely my own. It was my secret to keep, my poison to swallow. And now, as I sat in my quiet, sunlit condo, the echo of my daughter's heartbroken voice in my ear, "Why don't they love me?" I felt the full, crushing weight of my decade of deception. My peacekeeping had not been a kindness. It had been a form of cruelty. I had not protected her from the pain. I had just postponed it. And I had allowed her to believe for 10 long years that the flaw was in herself and not in the two withered and prejudiced hearts of her own grandparents. The lie, I knew, had finally become a weight too heavy for me to carry. I'm sitting here on my lanai in the dark, the screen of my laptop the only light. And the storm I mentioned has finally passed. The air is clean, and the world smells of wet earth and new beginnings. It reminds me of the aftermath of the storm I unleashed on my own family. After that phone call with Sarah, the one where I told her the lie about her grandparents being too frail to travel, I was a wreck. The lie which had once felt like a necessary, if heavy, shield now felt like a shroud. It was suffocating me. I had protected my daughter from a painful truth, but in its place, I had allowed her to build a prison of self-doubt. And I, her mother, was the one who had handed her the bricks. In the days that followed, I wrestled with my conscience. The historian in me, the part of me that believes in the primacy of the truth, was at war with the mother in me, the part that would do anything to protect her child from pain. I thought of my late husband, Tom. He had been the buffer, the stoic, quiet man who had absorbed the worst of his parents' rigid, unforgiving nature. He had been the one to maintain the fragile diplomatic ties. With him gone, I was the sole ambassador to the cold, hostile nation of his family. And I was failing in my duties. In a moment of profound weakness and foolish hope, I decided to try one last time. I called them. Not my mother-in-law, Doris, whose heart I knew to be a small, hard, and impenetrable stone. I called my father-in-law Frank. He had always been the more approachable of the two, if only by a razor-thin margin. He answered on the third ring, his voice a dry, reedy thing. "Helen," he said. There was no warmth in it. "Frank," I began, my voice a careful, practiced calm. "I'm calling about Sarah. She's heartbroken that you and Doris couldn't call Leo for his 10th birthday. She feels like you've cut her out of your lives." "We sent a card," he said, his voice flat. "A card with $50 in it." "Frank," I countered, a note of frustration creeping into my voice. "That is not a relationship. That is a transaction. He is your great-grandson. He is a wonderful, bright, and loving little boy, and he doesn't even know you." "We are aware of the situation," he said, his voice now taking on the cold, dogmatic tone I knew so well. "The choices your daughter made have consequences. We made our position on her marriage very clear to you and to Thomas 11 years ago. Our position has not changed. She is your granddaughter," I pleaded, my voice now cracking with a decade of pent-up frustration. "She is your blood. How can you be so unforgiving? We are a family of principle, Helen," he said, his voice a final, unyielding judgment. "And we will not compromise our principles. It is your duty as her mother to guide her, to help her see the error of her ways, not to encourage her in them. Now, if you'll excuse me, my program is on." The line went dead. I stood there in my quiet, sunlit kitchen, the dial tone a dull, mocking hum in my ear. That was it. Door was closed, locked, barred. My last desperate attempt at a peaceful, rational solution had been utterly and completely rejected. The lie was all I had left. Defeated, I retreated into the one place where my family still felt whole, where the poison of my in-laws' prejudice could not reach, the digital world of my daughter's Facebook page. I would spend hours there, a quiet, loving ghost, scrolling through the beautiful, vibrant, and deeply happy life she had built for herself. 'Twas my own private form of therapy. Her page was a testament to a life well lived. There were pictures of her and David, my wonderful son-in-law, at a charity gala, him looking impossibly handsome in a tuxedo, her looking radiant in a blue dress that matched her eyes. There were albums full of their travels, of my grandchildren, Leo and Maya, standing in front of the Grand Canyon, their faces full of a joyous, youthful wonder. There were pictures of Leo's soccer games, of Maya's ballet recitals, of lazy Sunday afternoons in their messy, happy, and book-filled living room in Los Angeles. I would study their faces. My grandchildren. My beautiful, perfect mixed race grandchildren. Leo with his father's kind, intelligent eyes and my daughter's bright, easy smile. Maya with my daughter's blonde hair, now in beautiful, tight curls, and her father's warm, coffee-colored skin. They were a perfect, stunning synthesis of the two people I loved most in the world. They were the future. And my in-laws, with their talk of family lines and disgrace, were a dying, irrelevant relic of a hateful past. And as I would scroll, my heart would ache with a profound and a deeply ironic sadness. I was the only one who could see the whole picture. I was the only one who knew of the two tiny, withered branches of our family tree who were deliberately and with a cold, hard heart refusing to acknowledge the beautiful, new, and vibrant life that was growing all around them, the breaking point. The moment the lie finally became too heavy to bear. The moment that would lead me to this very Aita post came on a Thursday afternoon. Sarah posted a new photo. It was the official family portrait from Leo's 10th birthday party. The four of them were in their backyard, under a large oak tree. David had his arm around Sarah. Leo and Maya were in front of them, grinning, their faces smeared with a little bit of birthday cake frosting. It was a picture of pure, unadulterated, and almost painfully beautiful happiness. I smiled when I saw it, my heart swelling with a grandmother's fierce, protective pride. And then, a few minutes after she had posted it, a notification popped up at the bottom of my screen. Doris Gable commented on Sarah Peterson's photo. My blood ran cold. My mother-in-law never commented. She was a silent, judgmental observer in the digital world, a ghost who watched but never spoke. I clicked on the notification, my hand trembling slightly. The comment was not a comment. It was a grenade lobbed with a passive-aggressive precision from 100 miles away. Underneath the beautiful, smiling picture of my daughter and her family, my mother-in-law, their great-grandmother, had written 6 simple and utterly devastating words. A shame what's become of the family line. I stared at the sentence. At the black, digital letters on the white screen. I read it once. I read it again, and then a third time. The meaning was not subtle. It was not open to interpretation. It was a direct, public, and undeniably racist attack on my grandchildren, on my son-in-law, on my daughter. It was a declaration of her own ugly and hateful truth, left there for all of Sarah's friends, her entire community, to see. The lie, the kind, protective lie I had been telling for 11 years had just been murdered. It had been executed in public by the very people I had been trying to protect. My careful, diplomatic, and soul-crushing efforts to keep the peace had been for nothing. The poison had seeped through anyway, in the most public and permanent way imaginable. My phone rang. I knew, with a terrible, sinking certainty, who it was. It was Sarah, I answered. I did not even have a chance to say hello, Mom. She sobbed, her voice a raw, wounded, and deeply, deeply confused thing. Ah! Did you see it? Did you see what Grandma Doris wrote on my picture? Yes, sweetie, I whispered, my own heart breaking for her. I saw it. What does she mean? She cried, her voice rising with a frantic, desperate incomprehension. What does she mean? What's become of the family line? What is she talking about? Is it because I married David? Is it because of my children? What is wrong with my children? What is wrong with my family, Mom? What is wrong with me? And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been bent and bowed for decades under the weight of my role as the family peacekeeper, finally, irrevocably, snapped. Ha! I had spent 11 years listening to my daughter blame herself for the coldness of 2 hateful, bitter, and prejudiced old people. And I was done. The lie was no longer a shield. It was a cage. And I was about to set us both free. Listen to me, Sarah, I said, and my voice was a new thing. It was a voice she had never heard from me before. It was calm. It was cold. It was full of a terrible and a final resolve. There is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with your husband. And there is nothing wrong with your beautiful, perfect children. The problem is not you. The problem is them. And the problem is the story I have been telling you your entire life. I stood up, my mind a clear, sharp, and focused point of pure, unadulterated purpose. "Stay where you are," I said, my voice a quiet, steady command. "I'm getting. In my car, I am driving to you right now." "Why?" she asked, her voice small and afraid. "Because," I said, picking up my purse and my car keys, "there is something I should have told you 11 years ago. It's time you knew the truth. I am writing this on a Sunday night, and the rain has passed, leaving the air outside my lanai cool and clean. I've been thinking about the nature of truth. As a librarian, I spent my life surrounded by stories, by histories, by documented facts. I believed in the truth as an absolute, a clear and shining thing. But I have learned, in my long life, that the truth is often a messy, brutal, and deeply complicated thing. And the truth I was about to deliver to my daughter on that terrible sun-drenched Thursday afternoon was a truth that I knew would feel less like a revelation and more like a car crash. The drive from San Diego to Los Angeles along the I-5 freeway is a journey I have made 100 times. It is usually a pleasant, familiar trip. But that day, it was a 2-hour drive through a personal hell. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My mind was a chaotic, swirling vortex of the past and the present. With every mile that brought me closer to my daughter's home, I was also traveling deeper into the past, back to the memory of the conversation that had been the source of my great decade-long lie. It was 11 years ago, a Saturday. My husband Tom and I had driven to his parents' house in Orange County. We were so happy, so excited. Our daughter, our brilliant, beautiful Sarah, had just gotten engaged to David, the wonderful man we already considered a son. We were there to share the happy news with her grandparents. We had sat in their pristine museum-like living room, a room that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and unexpressed emotions. And we had told them. Tom had shown them the picture of the happy couple, Sarah's face alight with a joy so pure it was almost painful to look at, and then a silence, a cold, heavy, and deeply unnatural silence. My mother-in-law Doris had simply stared at the photograph, her thin lips pressed together into a hard, straight line. My father-in-law, Frank, had taken the picture, looked at David's kind, smiling, black face, and had placed the photograph face down on the coffee table. Well, Frank had finally said, his voice a low, cold, and utterly emotionless thing. "I suppose we should have expected this." "Expected what, Dad?" Tom had asked, his own happy, proud smile beginning to falter. "Expected your granddaughter to find a wonderful man to spend her life with. We expected her to find a man of her own kind," Doris had said, her voice a reedy, venomous whisper. "We are a good family, a respectable family. We have a history, and this is an insult to that history." The conversation that followed was the single ugliest one I have ever been a part of. They had not yelled. Their bigotry was not a loud, hot, and messy thing. It was a cold, quiet, and deeply considered cruelty. They had spoken of bloodlines, of purity, of the shame this union would bring upon our family name. They had talked about the children, the hypothetical, yet conceived children of my daughter and her fiancé, as if they were a contagion. "We will not have those children in our home, Thomas," Frank had said, his voice a final, unyielding judgment. "We will not have them at our Christmas dinners. We will not acknowledge them as our own. And if Sarah chooses to go through with this disgrace, then she is choosing to cut herself off from this family, from us. Tom, my good, decent, and loving Tom, had been magnificent. He had stood up to his own parents in a way I had never seen him do before. He had yelled, he had pleaded. He had defended his daughter's choice, his daughter's love, with a fierce, protective, and ultimately useless passion. They had been unmovable to ancient granite statues of prejudice. We had left their house that day, our relationship with them shattered. And in the long, silent car ride home, we had made our terrible, fateful decision. We would lie. We would protect Sarah from the full, ugly, and racist truth of their rejection. We would tell her they were just old-fashioned. We would absorb their poison ourselves so that she would not have to. It was an act of love, and it was a profound and a catastrophic mistake. I pulled off the freeway and navigated the familiar, sun-drenched streets of my daughter's neighborhood in Los Angeles. Her home was a beautiful little Spanish-style bungalow, a riot of color and life. The front yard was a chaotic, beautiful garden of wildflowers, a stark contrast to the manicured, sterile lawns of her grandparents' community. The house was a reflection of the life she had built, vibrant, creative, inclusive, and deeply, wonderfully happy. And I was about to walk into that happy home and detonate a bomb. My son-in-law, David, opened the door before I could even knock. The look on his face was one of deep and a deeply worried love for his wife. "Helen," he said, his voice low. "Thank you for coming. She's in the living room." "She's a mess." I walked in. Sarah was curled up on the sofa, her knees pulled to her chest, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. She was holding her phone, her thumb tracing the outline of the family photo that her grandmother had so cruelly defaced with her words. She looked up at me, her eyes the same, confused, wounded eyes of the little girl I had once bandaged the knees of. "Mom," she whispered, "what does she mean?" I walked over and sat down beside her, taking her cold hands in my own. David stood behind the sofa, his hand a steady, reassuring presence on his wife's shoulder. "Sweetheart," I began, my own voice trembling slightly. "There is something I should have told you a long time ago. A very long time ago. Your father and I, we made a decision to try and protect you from a pain we didn't think you should have to feel. And we were wrong. And our mistake, our silence, has allowed this to fester. It has allowed you to blame yourself for something that has absolutely and unequivocally nothing to do with you." And then I told her. I took a deep breath, and I unburdened myself of the great, heavy, and poisonous lie I had been carrying for 11 years. I told her the entire ugly and unvarnished truth. I told her about the meeting in her grandparents' pristine, silent living room. I did not soften the words. I repeated them, verbatim, the cold, hard, and unforgivably racist things they had said. I told her about their ultimatum, about their refusal to attend her wedding, about their vow to never, ever acknowledge her children. As I spoke, I watched her face. I watched as the confusion slowly, agonizingly morphed into a look of dawning, horrified comprehension. The story she had told herself for a decade, the one where her grandparents were just old and frail and distant, the one where their rejection of her was somehow her own fault, was being systematically, brutally, and completely dismantled. "So all this time," she whispered when I had finished, her voice a raw, broken thing. "All the missed birthdays, all the unreturned phone calls, the cards with no signature, it wasn't because they were old. It was because of. Us. She looked from me to her husband to the framed photos of her beautiful, beloved children on the mantelpiece. Yes, honey, I said, my own tears finally falling. It was. She was silent for a long, long time. She just stared into the middle distance, her mind clearly reeling, processing the sheer monumental weight of the truth. I watched as her grief, the grief of a granddaughter who had just lost the idealized image of the grandparents she had loved, began to transform. The soft, wounded look in her eyes began to harden. The trembling in her hands stopped. The tears on her face seemed to dry, replaced by a cold, quiet, and deeply formidable resolve. All this time she said again, but her voice was different now. It was no longer the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a mother, a wife, a woman who was finally, for the first time, seeing the true and unvarnished nature of the enemy. They weren't rejecting me. They were rejecting my family. She looked at David, her fierce protective love for him, for their children, a palpable thing in the room. And then she looked at me. And you, she said, her voice now a mixture of a deep, sad understanding and a profound and a deeply moving gratitude. You have been standing between us and them, absorbing all of their hatred for 11 years. I just nodded, unable to speak. She stood up. The heartbroken, weeping girl was gone. In her place was a queen, a warrior, a mother who was about to defend her own. She walked over to her laptop, her movements now full of a calm and a terrifying purpose. Okay, she said, her fingers moving over the keyboard. Okay. I watched as she unfriended her grandmother on Facebook. As she unfriended her grandfather. And then, as she blocked them both, a small, simple, and digital act of profound and permanent banishment. The truth was out. It was a terrible, ugly, and devastating thing. But it was, at last, out in the open. The lie was dead. And the three of us, the small, loving, and beautiful family unit in that room, were, for the first time, united in its cold, hard, and deeply clarifying light. The time for my daughter's sadness was over. The time for her reckoning had just begun. I am sitting on my lanai in the dark, and the night is quiet. I've been reading the comments you've all left on my post. Many of you have focused on the final terrible moment of my in-laws' lives, on the cruelty of telling this truth too. People in their 90s, and you are not wrong to feel that. The consequences of my decision were immediate. They were brutal, and they were, I believe, absolutely necessary. The truth, once I had finally unleashed it in my daughter's living room, was not a gentle healing balm. It was a cauterizing fire. It burned away the diseased tissue of our family's great lie. And it was a deeply, profoundly painful process for everyone involved. But it was the only way we were ever going to heal. After I finished my long, sad story, a profound and heavy silence filled my daughter's living room. Sarah just sat there, nestled in the protective embrace of her husband, David, her face a pale, shocked mask. She was staring at the wall, but I knew she wasn't seeing it. She was seeing her entire life, her entire history, through a new, terrible, and clarifying lens. The years of confusion, of self-doubt, of wondering what she had done to deserve the cold. Distant silence of her own grandparents' saw of it had been suddenly, brutally, and finally explained. All this time, she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. All this time, I thought it was me. I thought I wasn't a good enough granddaughter. I thought I didn't call enough. I thought I had done something somewhere to offend them." She turned her face to look at David, at her husband, and her expression was one of dawning, horrified rage. "And it was you," she said to him, her voice now a low, dangerous hum. "It was always you. It's your beautiful, kind, and gentle heart. Your skin. That was my crime." "It was their crime, Sarah," David said, his own voice thick with an anger he had clearly been suppressing for a very long time. "Not yours." She looked at me then, her eyes full of a new and a deeply sad understanding. "And you've been carrying this for me," she said, "all these years. You and Dad, you've been standing in the middle, taking the hits, listening to their poison, just so I wouldn't have to." I just nodded, my own tears finally beginning to fall. "Thought we were protecting you," I whispered. "I know," she said. And then she stood up. The weeping, confused daughter was gone. In her place was a woman I had never seen before. A woman of pure, cold, and formidable resolve. "Kay," she said, walking over to her laptop. "The protection is over." I watched as she performed the quiet, digital surgery. She unfriended her grandmother. She unfriended her grandfather. Or she blocked them both. A simple, clinical, and irreversible act of banishment. Then she picked up her phone. "What are you doing?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "I'm making a phone call," she said, her voice a calm, steady thing. "They have been punishing me for 11 years for a crime I did not understand. And you have been living a lie for 11 years to protect them from the consequences of their own hatred. The lie is over, and so is the punishment. It's time they heard it from me." She dialed the number. David and I just sat there, silent, terrified, and proud as we watched our daughter, our wife, finally and completely reclaim her own story. "Grandma," Sarah said into the phone, her voice a perfect, chilling imitation of a polite, granddaughterly call. "Okay, Sarah." She listened for a moment, a small, cold smile on her face. "No, I'm fine. I'm not calling to apologize for the picture of my own son's birthday party. I'm actually calling about the comment you left on it." She paused. "No, the one where you said it was a shame what's become of the family line. I just had a few questions about that. I was just wondering what specifically you were referring to." She listened again, her eyes fixed on the middle distance. "Right?" she said. "Right. Well, it's funny you should mention that because my mother is here with me right now. And she has just told me the most fascinating story. A story about a conversation she and my father had with you and Grandpa. Frank, about 11 years ago, right after I got engaged to the love of my life." Her voice was as calm as a frozen lake, but underneath I could feel the immense tectonic shifting of a lifetime of suppressed pain. "She told me," Sarah continued, "about your concerns, about your refusal to come to our wedding, about your vow to never acknowledge our children. So I guess my question is this, Grandma, is it my son's love of chocolate cake that has so disgraced the family line? Or is it the beautiful brown color of his skin?" The silence on our end of the phone was absolute. I could only imagine the sputtering, panicked silence on the other. "Right," Sarah said again, after a long moment. "That's what I thought." Her voice, when she spoke again, was no longer questioning. It was a final, clear, and utterly unforgiving judgment. "So I am calling to tell you that the lie my mother and father so lovingly and so mistakenly told for the past 11 years to protect you from the consequences of your own bigotry is now over, and so are we. You will not receive any more pictures of my children. You will not get any more invitations to their birthdays. You will not be a part of our lives. You made your choice 11 years ago. You chose your hatred over your own granddaughter. And now I am simply and with a very, very clear heart honoring that choice. Goodbye, Doris. She ended the call. She did not slam the phone down. She placed it gently on the coffee table. And then the rigid, powerful control she had maintained finally broke. She collapsed back into her husband's arms, and she began to sob. Not the confused, wounded sobs of before, but the deep, ragged, and profoundly cathartic sobs of a person who has just, finally, lanced a wound that has been festering for a decade. It was the sound of a terrible, painful, and necessary truth finally being set free. The fallout, of course, was immediate. The Gables, Frank, and Doris did what they had always done. They went on the offensive. They got on the phone to their own extensive network of family members, my late husband's siblings, my cousins-in-law. They spun their own deeply manipulative and self-pitying version of the story. A story in which their unstable liberal granddaughter and her cruel, vindictive mother had ganged up on two frail 96-year-old people and had broken their hearts, all because of a simple, misunderstood comment on the internet. My own phone began to buzz before I had even left Sarah's house. The first call was from my sister-in-law Barbara, my late husband's younger sister. Helen, what in God's name has happened? She demanded, her voice a shrill, accusatory. Thing, I just got off the phone with Mother. She is hysterical. She says you and Sarah have cut her and Daddy off. That you said the most horrible, hateful things to them. How could you do this? They are 96 years old. Have you lost your mind? And I, the woman who had spent a lifetime of family holidays, placating, of smoothing things over, of keeping the peace, I just took a deep breath. And I told the truth. What I did, Barbara, I said, my voice a calm, quiet, an unshakable thing, was finally stop lying. I told my daughter the truth about why your parents have refused to meet their own great-grandchildren for the past 10 years. I told her that it was not because they were old, but because they are racists. And Sarah, in turn, made the very brave and the very correct decision to protect her own children from their bigotry. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Barbara, who had her own complicated history with her parents' rigid judgment, had no response to the unvarnished truth. You have chosen your side, Helen, she finally whispered, her voice a mixture of anger and a grudging, resentful respect. And you have just destroyed this family. No, Barbara, I said, my voice full of a deep, sad, and hard-won wisdom. Your parents destroyed this family 11 years ago when they chose their prejudice over their granddaughter. Just, finally, decided to stop pretending that the rubble they left behind was a house. I ended the call. The family schism was now complete. The lines were drawn. And I was standing firmly and for the first time, completely and utterly, on the side of my daughter. I stayed the night at Sarah's. We sat up late, the three of us, talking, crying. And for the first time, sharing the full, unedited story of our family. We were an island now, the rest of our extended family a distant and an angry shore. The pain of that schism was real. It was a profound and a deeply sad loss. But as I sat there, in the warm, love-filled living room of my daughter's home, Watching her lean her head on her husband's shoulder, her face finally at peace, I knew, with an absolute and an unwavering certainty, that I had done the right thing. The old, false, and deeply broken family was gone. But a new one, a smaller, stronger, and more honest one, had just been born. It is Sunday night, and I have been writing for hours, the story of my family's great, terrible schism pouring out of me. The screen of my laptop is a bright rectangle against the darkness of my lanai here in San Diego, and it is full of your words, the comments of 1,000 strangers, a jury of my digital peers. You have been my confessors tonight. And now I must tell you the final chapter. I must tell you what happened after the truth was finally and irrevocably set free. The fallout was immense. The pain was real. But the peace we found on the other side of it all was a peace I had not known was possible. The days that followed my daughter's final terrible phone call with her grandparents were quiet. And they were sad, but they were also, for the first time, clean. I stayed with Sarah and David in their Los Angeles home for a week. We were an island, a small 3-person lifeboat in the middle of a stormy, familial sea. The angry accusatory calls and texts from my in-laws' side of the family, which had at first been a torrent, slowed to a trickle, and then stopped completely. The lines had been drawn, the sides had been chosen. And we, it seemed, were on our own. Sarah grieved. She grieved not for the 2 bitter old people who had rejected her and her children, but for the idealized storybook grandparents she had held in her heart for her entire life. She grieved for the loss of a fantasy. And David and I, we were her anchors. We let her talk. We let her cry. We let her rage. We bore witness to her pain, a pain that was, I knew, a necessary and purifying fire. She had to burn away the last vestiges of the lie before she could truly be free. Her anger, when it came, was not a loud, messy thing. It was a quiet, cold, and deeply protective maternal fury. She was a lioness and the target of her grandparents. Bigotry had not just been her. It had been her cubs. And that was an unforgivable sin. The final pathetic volley from my in-laws came a week after the phone call. A thick cream-colored envelope arrived, addressed to Sarah. It was from her grandmother, Doris. It was not an apology. It was a final, desperate, and deeply manipulative attempt to reframe the narrative, to cast herself as the victim. I watched as Sarah read the letter, her face a mask of stone. Then, without a word, she handed it to me. The letter was a masterpiece of self-pity and passive aggression. It was 4 pages of my mother-in-law's spidery, elegant script, a long, rambling monologue about her own broken heart, about the disrespect of the younger generation, about how her innocent, misunderstood comment had been twisted into something ugly by our own hateful liberal agenda. She wrote of her husband's failing health, of her own lonely, sleepless nights. She ended the letter with a final guilt-laden flourish. I will pray for you. Sarah, I will pray that you find your way back to a path of forgiveness and family loyalty before it is too late. I finished reading and looked at my daughter. She was no longer the heartbroken, weeping woman from the week before. Her eyes were clear and steady. She took the letter from my hands, and with a calm, deliberate, and almost ceremonial slowness, she tore it into 4 neat, perfect squares, and she dropped the pieces into the recycling bin. Okay, she said, her voice a quiet, final thing. I'm done with that now. And I knew that she was. That night, To mark the end of our strange, sad week of mourning, we decided to create a new ritual, a new tradition. We would have the first official family dinner of our new, smaller, and infinitely more honest family. It was not a grand affair. David grilled chicken in the backyard. Sarah made a simple, beautiful salad. I made the rice. My grandson, Leo, who had been the unwitting catalyst for this entire revolution, set the table. We sat around their worn, comfortable, and well-loved dining room table. There was no pretense. There was no performance. There was just us. And for the first time, we talked. We really talked. "I need to ask you something, Mom," Sarah said to me, after a long, comfortable silence. "Were you ever going to tell me if Grandma hadn't written that comment on my picture?" I looked at my daughter, at her intelligent, searching eyes, and I gave her the most honest answer I could. "I don't know," I whispered. "I hope so. But I was a coward for a very long time. I was so afraid of hurting you. And I was so afraid of breaking the peace. My whole life with your father and his family, it was about keeping the peace. And I think, somewhere along the way, I forgot the difference between peace and just. Quiet. There was nothing peaceful about it, Mom," she said, her voice gentle but firm. It was a quiet where I was always secretly wondering what was wrong with me. The truth, it was horrible. But it was better than the silence. David, my wonderful, quiet, and deeply wise son-in-law, reached across the table and took my hand. "You were trying to protect her, Helen," he said. "You did what you thought was best. But now we can all protect each other." He looked at Sarah, his eyes full of a love so profound it made my heart ache. "We are enough," he said to her. "Family, right here at this table. We are more than enough." And we were. We talked about the future. We talked about what we would tell the children when they were old enough to ask why they didn't see their great-grandparents. "We'll tell them the truth," Sarah said, her voice full of a new, hard-won strength. "We will teach them that love does not have a color. And we will teach them that it is okay to walk away from people who cannot or will not understand that." That night, as I lay in the guest room of my daughter's home, listening to the happy, normal, and deeply peaceful sounds of her family settling down for the night, I felt a sense of closure that I had not known was possible. I had lost a part of my family. The branch that had connected me to my husband's past had been severed. But the roots of my own small family, the one that was sitting right here in this house, had grown deeper, stronger, and more intertwined than ever before. I am back on my lanai now. It is Sunday night. My IATA post has been up for a few days, a strange digital confession to a world of strangers. My story is finished. My relationship with my in-laws is, and will remain, permanently severed. The rest of my husband's family, his sister Barbara included, has chosen their side. They send polite, distant Christmas cards. We do not speak. The loss of that larger, extended family is a real and a sad thing. But my relationship with my daughter, with her husband, with my grandchildren, has been transformed. It has been reforged in the fire of a terrible truth, and it has emerged stronger, more honest, and more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. The lie is gone. The silence is gone. And in its place is a love that is fierce, protective, and unconditional. So I leave it to you, Reddit. The verdict is yours. I chose to detonate a truth bomb that shattered my daughter's illusions and permanently fractured my family. all at the very end of my in-laws' long and prejudiced lives. Was it a cruel act? Perhaps, but it was also, I believe, the most profoundly loving and the most deeply necessary act I have ever performed as a mother. I destroyed a false peace. But I did it to protect my daughter's true and beautiful one. And that is a choice I will never, ever regret. It is Sunday night, and I have spent my weekend sharing the most painful chapter of my life with the quiet, anonymous void of the internet, and the void has answered back. I have read hundreds of comments from strangers on my post. Your words have been a surprising and a deeply moving chorus of validation. The overwhelming verdict has been not the asshole. And while I am grateful for the judgment of this digital jury, the real final verdict came much later, not in a comment thread, but in the quiet, awkward, and deeply sad setting of a funeral. Home in Orange County. The story did not end when I told the truth. The story ended when the last echoes of the lie had finally and completely faded away. The year that followed my great family-shattering revelation was one of a quiet and a difficult rebuilding. The schism in my late husband's family was, as I had predicted, permanent. My sister-in-law, Barbara, and I exchanged polite, sterile, and deeply sad Christmas cards. We did not speak. The larger family gatherings, the ones that had been the backdrop of my entire adult life, simply ceased to exist. The truth had been a bomb, and our family was now a collection of scattered survivors, each of us living in our own separate and quiet new reality. But my own small family, the one I had forged in the fire of that truth, thrived. My bond with Sarah, my daughter, was now deeper and more honest than it had ever been. We spoke every day. I would drive up to Los Angeles at least twice a month, not as a duty, but as a joy. I was no longer just a visitor in her life. Oh, I was a part of its very fabric. I watched my grandchildren, Leo and Maya, grow. I taught them how to bake my late husband's favorite chocolate chip cookies. I read them the same bedtime stories I had once read to their mother. In losing the large, fractured, and deeply dysfunctional family I had once belonged to, I had in turn been given the gift of this smaller, stronger, and more beautiful one. My in-laws, Frank and Doris, remained in their silent, self-imposed exile. Sarah, true to her word, never contacted them again. She had, with a quiet and a final dignity, accepted their rejection and had moved on with her life. The pain I knew was still there, a faint phantom ache, but it no longer defined her. She was free. The news when it came was not a shock. It was an inevitability. It was Barbara who called me almost a full year after the Christmas dinner. Her voice was flat, tired, and devoid of its usual accusatory edge. "Helen, she'd said it's Daddy. He's gone. Passed away in his sleep last night." A wave of a strange and a deeply complicated sadness washed over me. He had been my father-in-law for over 50 years, and he had been a stranger to me for all of them. "The funeral is on Saturday," she'd continued. I know things are difficult, but I thought you and Sarah should know. The question of whether or not we would go was a difficult one. My first instinct, the protective maternal one, was to shield Sarah from having to face her grandmother, from having to walk back into a room full of the people who had sided against her. But when I called Sarah and told her the news, her response was immediate, and it was full of a quiet and a mature strength that made my heart ache with pride. "We have to go, Mom," she'd said. "Not for them. Not for Grandma Doris, but for Dad, for Grandpa Frank. He was my grandfather. And his story, as complicated and as painful as it is still a part of my story. I want to go and say goodbye to that part, on my own terms. And so we went. The three of us. Me, Sarah, and my son-in-law, David. We drove down to Orange County on a bright, sunny Saturday morning, a silent, unified front, walking back into the heart of the family that had rejected us. The funeral home was a hushed, somber place, filled with the sweet, cloying scent of lilies and the quiet, awkward murmurs of grieving relatives. Our arrival was a silent, dramatic event. Ah! A hush fell over the room. The cousins and the aunts, the ones who had sent me angry texts, now just stared at us with a mixture of resentment and a deep, uncomfortable curiosity. And then I saw her, my mother-in-law, Doris. She was in a wheelchair, a frail, shrunken, and ancient-looking woman, a black veil covering her white hair. She looked, for the first time in her life, like what she was, a 97-year-old widow, small and sad and alone. We did not speak to her before the service. We took our seats in the back row, a silent, self-contained island. After the service, at the small reception, Sarah made a choice. A brave and a deeply compassionate one. She walked over to her grandmother. David and I followed, a quiet, supportive honor guard. Doris looked up as we approached, her old, faded eyes, which had once been so full of a cold, hard judgment, now just looked. "Tired, Grandma," Sarah said, her voice a quiet, gentle thing, devoid of any anger or accusation. I was so sorry. To hear about Grandpa Frank, I have so many good memories of him from when I was a little girl. He was a good man. Doris just stared at her for a long moment. And then her eyes flicked past Sarah to my two beautiful, beloved grandchildren, Leo and Maya, who were standing quietly beside their father. She looked at their faces, at their beautiful brown skin, at their bright, intelligent eyes, and I saw it a lifetime of rigid, unshakable, and deeply ingrained prejudice, just crumbling. It was a slow, agonizing, and almost imperceptible shift, but it was there. She was looking for the first time, not at a disgrace to the family line, but at the beautiful, living, breathing faces of her own great-grandchildren. The children she had never known. Her old, wrinkled, and liver-spotted hand reached out, a trembling, hesitant gesture. She looked at my granddaughter, at Maya, at her beautiful, blonde, curly hair. You have your grandmother's hair," she whispered, her voice a dry, reedy, and broken thing. She was talking about me, and then she looked up at Sarah, and her eyes filled with the slow, difficult tears of a 97-year-old woman who was finally, at the very end of her long and bitter life, confronting the profound and irreversible magnitude of her own great and terrible mistake. He was a stubborn man. "Your grandfather," she whispered, her voice cracking. We were wrong. So much wasted time." It was not a grand apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was something quieter and sadder and perhaps more honest. It was a confession, a final deathbed admission of a life lived on the wrong side of love. Sarah just nodded, her own eyes now full of a deep and a compassionate sadness. She reached out and squeezed her grandmother's frail hand. "Yes," she said softly. "It was." We left the funeral home and drove not back to LA, but to the coast. We went to the beach, to a spot where Tom and I had once taken a young Sarah to fly a kite. We walked along the sand, the cool Pacific water washing over our feet, and Sarah, my beautiful, strong, and deeply, wonderfully kind daughter, took out her phone. "Okay, everyone," she said, her voice now light and clear and free. "Family picture." She gathered us together. Me, David, Leo, and Maya. She held the phone out, and we all squeezed into the frame, the vast blue and endless ocean behind. Us. We all smiled. A real, genuine, and unbreakably happy smile. I am looking at that picture now. It is in a silver frame on my bedside table. It is the last and the best chapter of my story. The Aita post I wrote, the story of my family's great terrible schism, is still there on the internet. But the question it asks is, for me, finally answered. The truth I told was a painful and a destructive thing. It blew up a family. It shattered a lie. But it was only in the clearing, in the quiet, sunlit space after the explosion, that we could finally, truly, begin to build something new. A smaller, yes, but a more honest, a more decent, and a more loving family. A family built not on the shifting sands of secrets and shame, but on the solid, unshakable, and beautiful bedrock of the truth. And that, I have decided, is a legacy I can finally and completely be at peace with.